Hello and welcome to Cosmic Sleep Stories. Tonight, we'll drift into a tranquil journey through the cosmos and beyond, exploring 100 gentle, sleep-inducing facts that will carry you softly into the night. Perhaps you've wandered here after a demanding day, seeking something to ease your thoughts into stillness. Or maybe you're simply drawn to the quiet wonder of discovery, the kind that unfolds slowly, like petals opening to morning dew. Tonight, we turn our gaze not to distant stars, but to something closer, something rooted in soil and silence. We'll explore the hidden world of plants, those still companions that fill our world with green, and ask a question that seems almost impossible. Could they be thinking? Not in the way we think, perhaps, but in a way all their own. Let yourself settle into comfort. Let your breathing deepen and allow these gentle revelations to guide you toward rest. When we imagine awareness, we picture eyes that see, limbs that move, voices that call across distance. We think of a bird adjusting its flight to shifting winds, or a creature pausing at a sound, deciding whether to approach or retreat. Intelligence, as we've always understood it, seems inseparable from motion, from the ability to flee danger or pursue desire. Yet there exists another kind of existence entirely, one anchored in place from the first moment of life. A seed germinates, sends roots downward into darkness, reaches stems upward toward light, and there it remains, season after season, unable to wander even a single step. And yet these rooted beings have spread across nearly every corner of our world. They thrive in baking deserts where water is only a memory, in marshlands where roots drown in stillness, on windswept peaks where soil is scarce and cold bites deep. They grow beneath dense canopies where sunlight barely whispers through leaves, and in salt-crusted flats where nothing else dares take hold. How do they do this without the tools we associate with survival? Without nerves to carry warnings, without muscles to escape, without anything resembling what we call a mind? The answer, researchers are discovering, may lie in a form of intelligence we've simply never learned to recognize. Perhaps we've been looking in the wrong places, listening to the wrong rhythms, measuring time on the wrong scale. Plants experience the world in ways that unfold across hours and days rather than seconds. Where an animal might flinch from heat in an instant, a leaf might take the whole morning to adjust its angle, turning gently to catch light or avoid the shadow of its neighbor. This slowness isn't absence. It's a different tempo, a quieter language spoken in chemistry and growth rather than movement and sound. Consider how many signals a single plant perceives all at once. Light arrives in shifting qualities, bright in some hours, dim in others, filtered through different angles as the sun arcs overhead. Moisture moves through soil in patterns, sometimes abundant, sometimes vanishing into dryness. Gravity pulls steadily downward, orienting roots and stems. Touch arrives through wind, through rain, through the brush of other organisms. Chemicals drift through soil and air, carrying messages about nutrients, about neighbors, about threats. And a plant doesn't simply detect these signals one by one. It gathers them all together, weighs them against one another, and responds not to any single input, but to the pattern they create together. When roots grow toward water hidden beneath stones, they aren't expanding randomly in all directions. They're following a gradient, a subtle change in moisture that tells them which way leads to life. Other signals, perhaps nutrients in a different direction, are set aside. The plant is making a choice, selecting one path over others based on priority. When a seedling pushes through soil toward the surface, it doesn't simply grow upward, because that's what seedlings do. It's sensing gravity, orienting itself, adjusting its trajectory if it encounters an obstacle. These aren't reflexes in the way we usually understand them. They're responses shaped by context, by the specific conditions surrounding that particular plant at that particular moment. Scientists studying these behaviors have begun using words that once seemed to belong only to the world of creatures with brains. They speak of decision-making in roots, of anticipation in leaves, of learning that persists across seasons. These aren't poetic flourishes or metaphors meant to make dry research more appealing. They describe real phenomena, behaviors that change not just with present conditions, but with past experience. Some plants, it seems, can remember. There's a small plant, sometimes called the sensitive plant, whose leaves fold inward when touched, a response thought to startle herbivores or protect tender tissue from damage. In laboratories, researchers began touching these leaves repeatedly, over and over, in a way that carried no real threat. At first, the leaves folded each time, quick and consistent. But gradually, something shifted. The folding slowed, then weakened, then stopped altogether. The plant had learned that this particular touch meant nothing dangerous. It had filtered out the noise. When a different kind of touch was introduced, a shake rather than a tap, the folding returned immediately. This wasn't exhaustion or damage to the leaves. It was discrimination. The plant had evaluated the stimulus, categorized it, and adjusted its behavior accordingly. What makes this even more remarkable is that the change persisted. Days later, even after the plants were moved to entirely new environments, they continued to ignore the familiar touch while responding to new ones. Somewhere within those leaves, within cells and tissues that contain no neurons, no synapses, no structures we associate with memory, an experience had been recorded and a lesson had been learned. If memory can exist without a brain, what else might be possible? What other capacities might be hidden in stem and root, waiting to be discovered? Researchers around the world are now asking these questions, not simply to understand how plants react, but to understand how they process the world, how they transform sensation into meaning, how they hold the past and use it to shape the future. Take the behavior of climbing plants, those vines that reach upward, searching for support. In one study, scientists placed young vines near lights that moved in steady circles, rotating around the plant in a predictable rhythm. At first, the vines did what you might expect. They grew toward wherever the light happened to be at that moment, always a step behind, always catching up. But as days passed, something extraordinary happened. The vines began to change direction before the light moved. They grew not toward where the light was, but toward where it was about to be. They had learned the pattern. They had built some kind of internal model of the light's movement and were using it to predict what came next. This isn't instinct in any traditional sense. Instinct is behavior encoded in genes, unchanging across generations, the same response to the same stimulus every time. But this was different. This was a response shaped by experience, by repetition, by the specific history of that individual plant. It suggests that plants can track patterns over time, that they can hold a memory of rhythm and use it to anticipate the future. In another series of experiments, researchers exposed small flowering plants to cold temperatures at the same time each day, morning after morning, creating a predictable cycle of stress. After just a few repetitions, the plants began preparing for the cold before it arrived. Genes associated with cold tolerance switched on ahead of time, activating defenses before the temperature actually dropped. The plants had learned the schedule. They remembered when difficulty arrived and braced themselves in advance. This kind of preparation, this ability to act not on what is happening, but on what is likely to happen, sits at the boundary between reaction and cognition. A plant leaning toward light is responding to a stimulus in the present, but a plant adjusting its chemistry in anticipation of stress that hasn't yet arrived is doing something more complex. It's holding information about the past, comparing it to the present, and using both to shape its future state. That process, simple as it may sound, is a form of inference. An inference, even in its most basic form, is a cognitive act. Animals learn in much the same way. They build internal models of their environment, maps of what usually follows what, and they update those models as new experiences arrive. A bird learns which trees bear fruit in which season. A fox learns where prey tends to gather at dusk. They don't react blindly to each moment. They carry a history with them, a collection of patterns that helps them navigate the world more skillfully. And now it seems that plants, despite lacking anything we'd recognize as a nervous system, are capable of something similar. But if there's no brain to hold these memories, no central organ where information is stored and decisions are made, then where is this happening? How does a plant, scattered across roots and leaves and stems, act as a unified whole? The answer lies in a different model of intelligence entirely. In animals, cognition is centralized. The brain gathers signals from the body, processes them in specialized regions, issues commands, and stores memories in physical structures we can map and study. But plants have no such center. There's no command hub, no place where signals converge and choices are made. Instead, their intelligence, if we can call it that, is distributed. Every cell is part of the process. Across the entire body of the plant, networks of cells communicate through chemical and electrical signals, passing information from root to leaf and back again, coordinating responses without any single point of control. These signals don't just travel short distances. A stimulus applied to one part of a plant can trigger changes in parts that were never directly touched. A root encountering salt in the soil can send signals upward that alter how leaves manage water. A leaf damaged by an insect can send warnings downward that change how roots allocate resources. The plant acts as a collective, not as a hierarchy. This kind of coordination requires integration, the ability to gather information from many sources and produce a unified response. And in some cases, that response looks remarkably like decision-making. Plants seem capable of weighing options, of choosing between competing strategies based on risk and reward. Researchers studying root growth discovered that when plants encounter salty soil, something that can damage tissue and interfere with water absorption, they don't always retreat. Sometimes they push forward anyway, extending roots into the hazardous zone. But not randomly. If the soil also contains abundant nutrients, enough to outweigh the danger, the roots continue. If nutrients are scarce, they hold back. The plant is evaluating its options. It's balancing cost against benefit. integrating multiple streams of information and choosing a path forward, all without a single neuron. This raises a question that grows more pressing the deeper we look. If a plant can weigh competing signals, if it can remember patterns, if it can anticipate future conditions and adjust its behavior accordingly, does that constitute intelligence? Or are we simply lacking better words for what's unfolding in these quiet green bodies? The boundaries we once thought were clear are beginning to dissolve. Memory, prediction, choice, integration of conflicting information. These are not mechanical processes in the way we once imagined. They're hallmarks of something deeper, something that demands a new vocabulary, a new way of seeing. And intelligence, however we define it, doesn't exist in isolation. It emerges through connection, through the sharing of information, through networks that link individuals into something larger than themselves. In the animal world, we see this in flocks and herds, in the coordinated movements of fish or the collective decisions of social insects. But plants too are connected, not through sight or sound, but through pathways hidden beneath the soil and through molecules drifting on the air. Underground, roots intertwine with fungal threads, forming partnerships that stretch across vast distances. These fungi, called mycorrhizae, weave between the roots of many plants, linking them into a shared network. Through these living threads, plants can exchange resources. A tree standing in full sunlight might pass sugars to a smaller tree growing in shade. A plant with access to abundant nitrogen might share it with neighbors whose soil is poor. This isn't waste or accident. It's targeted, reciprocal, and in some cases, selective. When a tree is injured, when insects chew through bark or disease takes hold, chemical signals can travel through these fungal networks to nearby trees. Those trees, even though they themselves are untouched, begin ramping up their defenses. They produce compounds that make their leaves less palatable, that thicken their bark, that prepare them for an attack that hasn't yet arrived. It's an early warning system, a way of saying something is wrong, be ready. But the communication doesn't stop at the root zone. Plants also speak through the air, releasing volatile chemicals when they're damaged. These airborne molecules drift on the breeze, and neighboring plants detect them. Upon sensing these signals, they too increase their production of defensive compounds, even though nothing has touched them yet. They're listening to the distress of others and responding to it. This kind of communication shatters the idea that plants are isolated organisms, separate and self-contained. Instead, they appear embedded in rich informational webs, networks where messages flow constantly, where individuals are not truly alone, but part of a collective awareness. Some species even seem capable of recognizing their relatives. In experiments with certain coastal plants, individuals grown beside close kin competed less aggressively for resources than those grown beside strangers. They allocated space more generously, shared nutrients more freely, as if they could sense the genetic connection and adjust their behavior accordingly. This suggests not just awareness of the environment, but a discriminating awareness, a capacity to assess who is nearby and respond differently based on identity. In animals, such selective behavior relies on neural circuits, on memory systems, and sensory integration. But in plants, the mechanisms are different. Signals move through vascular tissues, through changes in pressure and chemistry. Communication happens molecule by molecule, slower than thought. but no less effective. And the outcome, in many cases, resembles choice. Sometimes these choices are made not by individuals, but by groups acting in concert. In deserts, certain shrubs synchronize their flowering after rain, not just one plant responding to moisture, but entire populations coordinating their timing. The result is a wave of bloom that attracts pollinators in numbers no single plant could summon alone. The signal is shared, the behavior collective, and the benefit distributed across many. In forests, this cooperation becomes even more intricate. Trees connected by root grafts and overlapping fungal networks seem to adjust their behavior based on shared information. A struggling tree might receive extra sugars from healthier neighbors. A tree under attack by insects might send chemical warnings through the network, prompting others to prepare their defenses. Success becomes interdependent, survival linked across individuals, creating something that functions less like a collection of separate plants and more like a single distributed organism. These underground networks have been called the Wood Wide Web, a name that captures both their reach and their complexity. Through them, trees exchange not just resources, but information. A shaded sapling unable to photosynthesize enough to survive might receive support from a mature tree nearby, sometimes a parent, sometimes simply a neighbor with resources to spare. This isn't charity in any conscious sense, but it is reciprocity, a system where giving and receiving flow in patterns that strengthen the whole. Some species appear to distinguish between kin and strangers, offering more support to relatives than to unrelated individuals. Others adjust their growth depending on who surrounds them, extending roots aggressively toward competitors while softening their expansion near siblings. In these relationships, we glimpse another layer of what might be called awareness. Not awareness as subjective experience, not the feeling of knowing, but awareness as perception, as the ability to distinguish, to categorize, to modify behavior in relation to others. And the language plants use to communicate, both below ground and through the air, is far more nuanced than we once believed. Some plants can tailor the chemicals they release depending on the kind of threat they face. If an insect chews on a leaf, the plant might release compounds that attract that insect's natural predator. But if a disease attacks instead, the chemical signature shifts, activating a different set of defenses better suited to infection. This isn't a single alarm. It's a specific message, fine-tuned to the nature of the danger. That level of specificity requires discrimination. It means the plant can assess what kind of harm is occurring and respond accordingly. In biological terms, this demands a system of receptors, molecules that detect specific cues and trigger cascading chains of chemical reactions. Each leaf, each section of root, each patch of stem is embedded with these sensors, making the entire plant a distributed network of perception, a body that processes information without centralizing it. Some researchers have begun comparing this to rudimentary computation, not in the digital sense, not circuits and code, but computation in its most fundamental form, the transformation of input into output according to structured rules. In plants, those rules are biochemical. Light of a certain wavelength triggers a hormonal response. Pressure on a stem activates mechanoreceptors that alter growth. The presence of a specific molecule in the soil shifts gene expression in the roots. These are if-then operations, conditional responses that only occur when the right combination of factors is present. And just as a circuit can be reconfigured, so too can a plant's response pathways. Repeated stress can make certain reactions faster or stronger the next time they're needed. In this way, plants exhibit a form of learning, not by changing behavior directly, but by adjusting the sensitivity of their internal systems, tuning themselves to the rhythms of their environment. This ability to recalibrate, to become more responsive to threats that recur and less reactive to stimuli that prove harmless, is another marker of intelligence in living systems. It's a way of becoming wiser through experience, not by thinking in any way we recognize, but by reshaping the very machinery of response. One of the most intriguing aspects of all this is how these responses scale. A single leaf might produce defensive chemicals when damaged, but the signal doesn't stop there. It travels through the plant's tissues, carried by electrical impulses or waves of calcium moving from cell to cell, triggering defenses in leaves that were never harmed. This systemic signaling echoes the way signals move through animal nervous systems, though in plants, the cells that carry these messages are not specialized solely for communication. They are also sites of metabolism, of photosynthesis, of water transport. They serve multiple functions at once, adding layers of complexity to an already intricate system. Yet even within this complexity, the signals move with purpose. They follow specific routes depending on the kind of stress. An attack by insects triggers one pathway. A lack of water triggers another. The plant doesn't just broadcast distress in all directions. It chooses how to respond, where to send the signal, and what form that signal should take. This specificity suggests something profound. It suggests that plants don't merely react to the world, they interpret it. They build, in their own way, an internal representation of external reality, a biochemical map drawn not in thoughts, but in the shifting concentrations of hormones, ions, and proteins. And that map guides behavior, shaping growth, altering chemistry, directing the plant's limited resources towards survival. Let your breathing deepen now. Let these thoughts settle like leaves drifting to forest floor. There is no hurry here, no urgency. We are simply wandering through a landscape of wonder, tracing the quiet intelligence woven into bark and root. More awaits, but for now, let yourself rest in this stillness, in the knowledge that even in silence, even in rootedness, there is awareness, there is response, there is a kind of wisdom older than words. We return now to the quiet world of green beings, to roots that reach through darkness and leaves that unfold toward dawn. Let yourself sink deeper into comfort. Let your thoughts drift like pollen on a gentle breeze. We continue our exploration of how plants sense, respond, and perhaps in their own wordless way, understand the world around them. One of the most fascinating discoveries in recent years involves a kind of learning that scientists once thought belonged only to animals with nervous systems. Researchers worked with young bean plants, exposing them to a fan that blew air across their leaves just before a light source appeared. Day after day, the pattern repeated. First the breeze, then the light. At first, the plants simply grew toward the light when it arrived, as any plant would. But gradually, something shifted. The plants began bending toward the fan even when the light was delayed or withheld entirely. They had formed an association between two unrelated stimuli, learning that the wind predicted the arrival of something valuable. This is the same principle that guides associative learning in animals. the foundation of countless behaviors we take for granted. A sound that precedes food, a scent that signals danger, the pairing of experience with outcome, repeated until the connection becomes automatic. And here it was, unfolding in a plant, in an organism without a single nerve cell. Some scientists questioned whether this truly qualified as learning, whether it met the threshold we apply to animal behavior. But from a purely observational standpoint, the criteria seem clear. The plant altered its future behavior based on the pairing of past experiences. It formed a prediction. It acted on that prediction. By any functional definition, it had learned something. But how does this work without neurons, without the synaptic connections that allow animals to store and retrieve memories? The answer lies in the language plants speak fluently, the language of chemistry. Plants regulate their behavior through intricate networks of hormonal signals, electrical pulses, and shifts in gene expression. Each pathway responds to specific environmental cues: the quality of light, the pressure of touch, the temperature of air, the availability of nutrients. Over time, the plant's history becomes encoded not in a centralized memory bank, but throughout its tissues, distributed across roots, stems, and leaves. This distributed encoding allows for what some researchers have called somatic memory, the idea that a plant's body itself carries its experiences. Repeated exposure to drought, for instance, can cause lasting changes in how a plant manages water. Even after moisture returns, the altered patterns may persist. The plant behaves as though it remembers the scarcity, as though it's hedging against future risk. This isn't passive carryover from damage. It's an active, regulated adjustment, often involving changes in how genes are expressed, modifications that endure long after the original stress has faded. In some remarkable cases, these adjustments can even pass to the next generation. Seeds produced by stressed plants sometimes carry altered response profiles, as if the offspring inherit a kind of preparedness for the conditions their parent endured. This isn't evolution in the traditional sense, not a change in the genetic code itself, but something more flexible and immediate. It's a form of transgenerational memory, passed through chemical modifications to chromosomes, through small regulatory molecules, through hormonal states that shape how the next generation responds to its world. This inheritance of experience has led some scientists to explore the idea that plants possess a form of environmental wisdom, not encoded in sequences of DNA, but imprinted through the lived experiences of their lineage. If a family line has endured repeated cycles of salt stress or insect attacks, the descendants may grow with heightened sensitivity to those threats, adjusting their root architecture, their leaf chemistry, their flowering time accordingly. These aren't random variations. They're inherited strategies, shaped not by mutation and selection alone, but by memory, by the echoes of hardship carried forward in biological form. Such inheritance blurs the line between instinct and learning. In animals, learned behavior is typically individual, acquired through direct experience and lost when that individual dies. But in plants, information can persist across generations without changing the underlying genome. It challenges our categories, our neat divisions between what is innate and what is acquired, and raises new questions about how intelligence might manifest in systems without consciousness. This also invites us to consider intelligence not as something confined within a single organism, but as something that emerges collectively, across networks, across communities. In forest ecosystems, trees are not solitary towers, but nodes in vast underground webs. These networks, formed through symbiotic partnerships between roots and fungi, don't merely move nutrients from place to place. They transmit warnings, coordinate responses, and in some cases, seem to prioritize certain connections over others. When a tree falls ill or comes under attack, chemical signals ripple through the fungal network to neighboring trees. Those neighbors, though they themselves remain unharmed, begin producing defensive compounds, thickening their chemical armor before the threat reaches them. This coordinated response can span dozens of individuals, sometimes even crossing species boundaries. It's a form of collective vigilance, a shared awareness distributed across many bodies. What makes this even more striking is the selectivity involved. Studies suggest that trees may allocate more resources to their offspring than to unrelated neighbors, that they may respond more strongly to distress signals from kin. It hints at a level of recognition and discrimination that seems almost social, a botanical version of kinship and alliance. The dynamics of these underground conversations are more sophisticated than simple diffusion. Chemical messages don't just spread passively. They move along concentration gradients, are selectively absorbed by some roots and ignored by others, and in some cases seem to vary in intensity depending on the sender's condition. A tree in severe distress might emit stronger signals, prompting more urgent responses in those nearby. The volume of the message can be adjusted, tuned to the severity of the situation, and receiving plants don't all respond identically. Different species, even different individuals of the same species, may interpret the same chemical cue in subtly different ways. One might ramp up toxin production, another might alter its growth pattern, a third might shift the timing of reproduction. This suggests that the messages themselves are not rigid commands, but information open to interpretation, filtered through the physiology and past experiences of each recipient. This layered responsiveness adds yet another dimension to our understanding of plant intelligence. The same signal can mean different things depending on context, on history, on the identity of both sender and receiver. In a mixed forest, a volatile compound released by a damaged willow might prompt an alder to increase tannin production while causing a nearby spruce to delay bud formation. Each response is tailored not just to the message, but to the needs and strategies of the individual receiving it. Researchers have also found that these responses can depend on prior exposure. A plant that has previously encountered a particular threat may react more quickly or intensely to the warning signal than one encountering it for the first time. The plant has been primed, its defenses tuned to hair trigger readiness. This phenomenon, sometimes called induced resistance, operates like a kind of immunological memory, not through antibodies or immune cells, but through shifts in metabolic pathways, through enzymes held in reserve, through defensive compounds produced in advance and stored until needed. This brings us to a fascinating frontier, the idea that plant communication is not static, but adaptive. Signaling systems refine themselves over time, becoming more efficient, more specific, more attuned to the particular dynamics of a local community. If communication can adapt, then in a very real sense, plants are evolving the languages they speak, not across millions of years, but across seasons and generations, shaping their chemical dialects to match the listeners around them. In some species, this refinement becomes remarkably precise. Sagebrush plants, for instance, emit complex blends of volatile chemicals when damaged by herbivores. But the exact composition of those blends can vary depending on who is nearby. A sagebrush surrounded by genetic relatives releases a slightly different mixture than one growing among strangers, as if the message is being customized for the audience. Even more intriguing, the receiving plants, especially if they share genetic kinship, respond more vigorously to these tailored signals. It's a kind of botanical dialect, not universal, but familial, suggesting that plants may develop localized chemical languages fine-tuned to their immediate community. This raises an extraordinary possibility that plants, through ecological feedback and evolutionary time, have developed systems of information exchange that are both context-sensitive and flexible, systems that transmit not just raw data, but something closer to meaning. The message changes with the sender, the receiver, and the shared history between them. But what does it mean to share meaning without a mind? In cognitive science, meaning is often tied to representation, to the ability to encode something about the world and act upon it. In humans and many animals, this involves symbols, language, patterns of neural activity. But in plants, meaning resides in chemistry. A particular blend of terpenes, alkaloids, or phenolic compounds becomes an actionable signal. One molecule might instruct nearby plants to toughen their outer layers. Another might trigger accelerated root growth. The message lives in the molecule, and that molecule doesn't exist in isolation. It's decoded through receptors, proteins embedded in cell membranes that bind to specific compounds and initiate cascades of internal changes. These cascades often involve plant hormones, molecular messengers like jasmonic acid or salicylic acid that relay the signal inward, adjusting gene expression and reshaping physiology. The message is transmitted, received, interpreted, and remembered, all without a flicker of conscious thought. This chemical literacy, the ability to sense, decode, and respond to volatile signals, is remarkably widespread. Corn, tobacco, tomatoes, acacias, sages, and countless other species have all demonstrated airborne communication. The air between plants is not empty space. It's a medium rich with conversation, slow and silent and molecular. And like any conversation, context matters profoundly. The same molecule can have entirely different effects depending on who encounters it. A volatile cue from a damaged tomato plant might trigger defensive responses in another tomato, but be completely ignored by a different species growing nearby. In some cases, even plants of the same species respond differently depending on their past. If a plant has already survived an attack by a certain herbivore, it may become sensitized, reacting more swiftly the next time the associated chemicals appear. It's a form of chemical conditioning, a sharpening of meaning through experience. This sensitivity isn't random. It's built into the architecture of the plant's signaling pathways, into networks of receptors, enzymes, and regulatory proteins that interact like biological logic gates. Some pathways amplify one another, others inhibit. Some activate only when multiple conditions are met simultaneously, like the presence of a specific chemical signature combined with physical damage. In this way, plants don't just detect messages. They pass them, they discriminate, they apply layers of context before responding. And remarkably, this interpretation extends to what might be called eavesdropping, the monitoring of signals never intended for them. In experiments, researchers found that sagebrush plants released warning volatiles after being damaged, and nearby tobacco plants, an entirely different species, responded by increasing their own defensive chemistry. The tobacco wasn't the intended recipient, but it had learned to associate those airborne cues with danger. It had learned to listen in on conversations not meant for it. Some plants take this even further, not just listening, but actively manipulating the chemical environment to their advantage. In competitive settings, certain species emit volatile compounds that inhibit seed germination in the soil around them. This isn't defense, it's preemptive strategy. If resources are limited, preventing the success of potential competitors becomes a form of ecological control. But intriguingly, this suppression can be modulated. If the nearby seeds belong to close relatives, the chemical output may lessen, suggesting a form of kin-selective behavior that influences not just individual growth, but the structure of entire plant communities. This interplay of signal and counter-signal creates a dynamic field of biochemical negotiation. Plants aren't locked in isolated monologues, speaking into the void. They're engaged in a discourse full of cues and responses, alliances and deterrence, cooperation and competition. In meadows and forests, these interactions shape which plants thrive, which form partnerships, and which fade into the shade of more strategic neighbors. Even parasitic species have learned to exploit this chemical language. Dodder vine, a parasitic plant that cannot photosynthesize and must latch onto a host to survive, doesn't attach blindly to whatever it encounters first. Studies show that dodder seedlings can detect volatile chemical signatures from different potential hosts, bending their growth towards some and avoiding others. Given a choice between a nutritious tomato and a less suitable weed plant, dodder often moves preferentially toward the tomato. It's not growing at random. It's selecting a target based on chemical information, making a choice with real consequences for its survival. And once attached, parasitic plants continue monitoring their hosts, adjusting their own metabolism, growth rate, and reproductive timing based on the physiological condition of the organism they're feeding from. If the host is struggling, the parasite may reduce its extraction to avoid killing the source of its sustenance. If the host is flourishing, uptake may increase. It's a delicate balancing act, a kind of economic behavior governed not by conscious calculation, but by feedback loops and metabolic modulation. What makes these interactions even more remarkable is their simultaneity. A single plant might be processing dozens of signals at once: nutrient gradients in the soil, moisture levels, herbivore presence, the chemical identity of neighboring plants, the quality and direction of light. These inputs don't arrive in neat sequence. They overlap, conflict, compete for attention. And yet the plant produces a coherent response. It doesn't collapse under the weight of information. It filters, prioritizes, integrates. This capacity to synthesize complexity, to extract signal from noise and produce coordinated action, is part of what has led some researchers to argue for a broader definition of cognition. Not cognition as consciousness, not as the felt experience of knowing, but as the ability of a system to acquire, store, process, and deploy information in ways that guide adaptive behavior. In this light, The plant's distributed chemical network, with its capacity for anticipation, discrimination, memory, and even learning, begins to resemble not just a reactive system, but something more akin to a quiet, dispersed form of awareness. If we accept this broader framework, that intelligence can arise from the dynamics of a system rather than being confined to centralized brains, then the plant world becomes not merely fascinating, but philosophically challenging. It forces us to reconsider long-held assumptions about what it means to perceive, to know, to act with purpose. And it opens new questions about where the boundaries of cognition truly lie, if they lie anywhere at all. Recent studies have revealed that plants exhibit forms of electrical habituation. When exposed repeatedly to harmless stimuli, like gentle vibrations or light touches, the electrical responses in their tissues gradually diminish. They stop reacting as strongly. This neural-like attenuation is considered a primitive form of learning in animals. In plants, it's governed by calcium signaling, by the opening and closing of ion channels, by shifts in membrane potential, and crucially, it's selective, not merely fatigue. When a new stimulus is introduced, the electrical response returns at full strength, indicating that the plant has categorized the old stimulus as irrelevant while remaining vigilant to novelty. Other researchers have begun exploring whether plants might even sense sound. In carefully controlled experiments, roots have been observed growing towards sources of specific acoustic vibrations, such as the sound of water flowing through a pipe. The idea that a plant can detect and respond to sound waves without ears or any dedicated auditory organs seems almost impossible. Yet the evidence suggests genuine sensitivity to pressure waves in the medium around them. Tiny mechanoreceptors in root cells appear to transduce these vibrations into electrochemical signals, allowing the plant to use sound as yet another clue in navigating its buried world. And sound is only one frontier among many. Plants also respond to electromagnetic signals in ways we are just beginning to understand. Some studies suggest sensitivity to weak magnetic fields, such as those generated by the Earth itself, with plants subtly adjusting their growth direction or cellular processes in response. The mechanisms remain debated, but hypotheses include magnetically sensitive proteins, molecules already known to mediate light detection, that might also function as biological compasses. If true, it would mean plants navigate not only through soil and light, but through invisible fields of force that wrap around the entire planet. This multimodal sensitivity to light, gravity, moisture, chemistry, touch, sound, and perhaps even magnetism grants plants an extraordinary situational awareness. But what's even more remarkable is how they integrate all these inputs simultaneously. Plants don't respond to signals one at a time. They synthesize them. They prioritize. If water is scarce but light is abundant, they may favor root expansion over leaf growth. If temperature and light send conflicting cues, the plant chooses, weighing the variables and selecting a strategy. Let your mind rest now in this soft cascade of understanding. There is no test here, no need to hold on to facts or remember details. Simply let the images drift through you, roots reaching through darkness, leaves adjusting to invisible forces, chemical whispers traveling through soil and air. The world of plants is slower than ours, quieter, yet filled with a complexity we are only beginning to hear. More awaits in the gentle hours ahead, but for now, let yourself settle into this stillness. into the wonder of intelligence without thought, of awareness without a center, of memory woven into the very fabric of life. We drift onward now, deeper into the green world, into the layered mysteries of root and stem and leaf. Let your breathing slow. Let your body sink further into rest. There is no urgency in this journey, only the gentle unfolding of wonder, fact by fact, like petals opening in the cool of evening. We continue exploring how plants perceive, coordinate, and perhaps understand their world in ways we are only beginning to recognize. Much of this coordination relies on plant hormones, those chemical messengers that flow through tissues like whispers carried on a current. Each hormone has multiple roles depending on its concentration, its location, and the context in which it arrives. One such messenger, auxin, promotes the lengthening of cells in stems, helping shoots reach upward toward light. Yet in roots, the same molecule has the opposite effect, slowing growth and encouraging branching. It flows directionally through plant tissues, creating gradients that shape how a stem bends, how a branch forms, how new organs emerge from seemingly undifferentiated tissue. In this way, hormonal signaling in plants operates much like neurotransmission in animals, except slower, gentler, without the sharp edges of synaptic firing. Signals diffuse across space, are captured by receptors on cell surfaces, and trigger cascades of genetic and biochemical transformations. Some researchers now believe that this collective responsiveness, these vast webs of shared chemical cues and resource flow, may represent more than just a communication network. It may constitute a form of distributed intelligence, not a brain, not a mind in any traditional sense, but a system that collectively holds and acts upon information about the environment in ways no individual plant could achieve alone. This idea isn't merely philosophical speculation. It's testable. When parts of these networks are disrupted, when the fungal threads linking roots are severed or removed, the ability of plants to anticipate stress, coordinate flowering, or share nutrients declines measurably. The network itself appears to be a functional unit. Damage the system, and the intelligence dims. This challenges our understanding of individuality. In the plant world, identity is more fluid, boundaries more permeable. A tree is not just a tree standing in isolation. It's a node within a living web, shaped by and shaping the behavior of countless others. Its memories may be distributed across hormones, root tips, fungal partners. Its choices emerge not from a single center, but from the interplay of many parts, many organisms, many histories woven together. In some forests, elder trees, those standing tallest with deepest roots and widest canopies, seem to play a special role in these networks. They anchor fungal connections, support younger trees with transferred sugars, and in times of stress, appear to stabilize the flow of resources across the community. When these elder trees are removed, whether by storm or human hand, the surrounding network can falter. Younger trees grow more slowly, defensive responses weaken, the coordinated rhythms of the forest begin to fray. It suggests that age brings not just size, but function, that long-lived trees accumulate not just rings of wood, but something closer to ecological knowledge, patterns of response refined across decades or even centuries. These elder trees have weathered droughts, survived insect outbreaks, felt the rhythm of seasons cycle hundreds of times. Their root systems are vast, their fungal partnerships ancient and intricate. When a new threat emerges, their response is often more measured, more effective than that of younger trees. They seem to draw on a reservoir of accumulated experience, responding not just to the immediate stimulus, but to patterns learned over a lifetime. In this sense, the oldest members of a forest may serve as living libraries, repositories of environmental memory that benefit the entire community. This multi-generational continuity adds yet another layer to the idea of plant intelligence. It's not just that individual plants can remember, it's that ecosystems themselves may hold memory, encoded in the structure of networks, in the distribution of species, in the chemical languages refined over time. A forest isn't simply a collection of trees. It's a system with history, with patterns of cooperation and competition that have been tested and adjusted across generations. Some researchers have begun exploring whether these networks exhibit properties analogous to neural networks in animal brains. Not in structure, of course. There are no neurons, no synapses, but in function, in the way information flows, is processed, and influences future states. In a neural network, connections strengthen or weaken based on patterns of activity, allowing the system to learn. In a forest network, connections between trees, mediated by fungi, can similarly strengthen or weaken based on patterns of resource exchange, stress signaling, and reciprocal support. Over time, the network adapts, becoming more efficient at distributing resources, more responsive to threats, more resilient to disturbance. This adaptive capacity suggests that plant networks may exhibit a form of collective learning, not learning by individual organisms alone, but learning at the level of the community. A forest that has experienced repeated cycles of drought may develop more robust strategies for water sharing. A meadow that has faced persistent herbivore pressure may evolve tighter coordination of defensive signaling. These aren't conscious strategies. They emerge from the cumulative effects of countless interactions, from feedback loops that reward certain patterns and discourage others. In this light, intelligence need not be confined to skulls or even to single organisms. It can be a property of systems, of networks, of relationships. And if that's true, then the forests around us, the meadows, the grasslands, even the humble garden plot, may possess a kind of wisdom we've barely begun to perceive. But plant intelligence doesn't only operate at the scale of forests and communities. It also manifests in the intricate timing of individual life cycles, in the way plants track the passage of days and seasons. Many plants possess internal biological clocks, molecular oscillators that cycle with remarkable regularity, even in the absence of external cues. These clocks help plants anticipate daily changes in light, temperature, and humidity, preparing their physiology before conditions shift. A plant might open its stomata, those tiny pores on leaf surfaces, just before dawn, readying itself to capture carbon dioxide as soon as sunlight arrives. It might begin producing defensive compounds before the insects that feed on it typically become active, hedging against the most dangerous hours. This anticipatory timing isn't random. It's the product of internal rhythms synchronized to the external world, clocks set not by gears and springs, but by feedback loops involving genes, proteins, and light-sensitive molecules. These circadian rhythms persist even when plants are placed in constant darkness or constant light, cycling with periods close to a full day. The plant carries the rhythm within itself, a memory of time that continues ticking in the absence of external confirmation. Over days and weeks, these rhythms can drift slightly, but exposure to dawn or dusk resets them, resynchronizing the internal clock to the external world. It's a form of temporal awareness, an ability to track not just where and what, but when. Some plants take this temporal sensitivity even further, tracking not just daily cycles, but seasonal ones. They measure the length of nights, counting hours of darkness to determine the time of year. This process, called photoperiodism, allows plants to time critical life events like flowering, seed germination, or dormancy to match seasonal conditions. A plant that flowers too early might face frost. One that flowers too late might miss pollinators. By measuring night length with molecular precision, plants can synchronize reproduction with the seasons, maximizing their chances of success. But this isn't a simple on-off switch triggered by a threshold. Many plants integrate day length with temperature, with moisture, with nutritional status, weighing multiple factors before committing to flowering. It's a calculated decision, a risk assessment that considers both the opportunities and dangers of the moment. In this way, even something as seemingly automatic as flowering becomes an act of evaluation, a choice shaped by information gathered from the environment and interpreted through the plant's own physiological state. This temporal intelligence extends to memory across seasons. Some plants require a period of cold before they can flower, a process called vernalization. They must experience winter before they're ready for spring. But the plant doesn't simply detect cold. It counts it. It tracks how long the cold persists, integrating the signal over weeks or months. If the cold period is too brief, the plant doesn't commit to flowering, as if it knows that a false spring might be followed by killing frost. Only after sufficient cold has accumulated does the plant make the irreversible transition toward reproduction. What's remarkable is that this cold memory can persist even after temperatures warm. The plant remembers that winter has occurred, carrying that information forward in the form of chemical modifications to its DNA. Changes that don't alter the genetic code, but do alter which genes are active. These modifications, called epigenetic marks, function as a molecular memory, a record of past conditions that shapes future behavior. It's memory without neurons, without synapses, encoded instead in the chemical structure of chromosomes. In some cases, these epigenetic memories can even be passed to offspring, creating a form of inherited anticipation. Seeds produced after a harsh winter might carry modifications that prepare them for similar conditions, giving them a head start in a challenging environment. It's not evolution in the Darwinian sense, not a change in genes themselves, but a more rapid, flexible form of adaptation, allowing plants to respond to environmental patterns within just a generation or two. This transgenerational memory blurs the line between individual experience and inherited traits. A plant's offspring are shaped not only by the genes passed down, but by the environmental history encoded in how those genes are packaged and regulated. In essence, a plant can pass along lessons learned, warnings about drought or cold or herbivores, without changing its DNA. It's a kind of biological foresight, equipping the next generation to handle conditions the parent endured. Such mechanisms raise profound questions about how information flows through time in plant lineages. If a population has faced repeated cycles of stress, each generation inheriting modifications from the last, does the lineage as a whole become more adapted, more intelligent in a functional sense, even without genetic mutation? Some researchers believe the answer may be yes, that plants possess a form of soft inheritance, a system where experience leaves marks that guide future generations, creating a kind of ecological continuity that transcends the individual. This continuity also manifests in how plants respond to familiar versus novel threats. When a plant encounters a pathogen or herbivore for the first time, its defensive response may be slow, taking hours or even days to fully activate. But if the same threat returns, the response is often faster and stronger, as if the plant has been trained by the first encounter. This priming effect can last for weeks, months, or even the entire growing season, persisting as a heightened state of readiness. In some species, priming can even be triggered by signals from neighboring plants. A plant that has never been attacked itself can become primed simply by detecting volatile chemicals from a damaged neighbor. It's learning from the experience of others, eavesdropping on distress signals, and using that information to prepare its own defenses. In this way, information about threats can spread through a plant community faster than the threats themselves, creating a wave of preparedness that reduces overall damage. This social dimension of plant defense adds yet another layer to our understanding of botanical intelligence. Plants are not isolated problem solvers. They exist within informational ecosystems where the experiences of some influence the preparedness of others. The system as a whole becomes smarter, more responsive through the sharing of warnings and the collective tuning of defenses. Even more intriguing, some plants appear capable of distinguishing between different types of herbivores based on subtle cues in the damage pattern or the saliva left behind. An attack by a caterpillar triggers a different defensive response than an attack by an aphid, each tailored to the specific threat. The plant doesn't just react generically to damage, it identifies the attacker and deploys targeted countermeasures. For caterpillars, it might release volatiles that attract parasitic wasps. For aphids, it might produce sticky resins or compounds that interfere with feeding. It's a kind of diagnostic intelligence, an ability to assess the nature of a problem and select an appropriate solution from a repertoire of options. This diagnostic capacity requires sophisticated signal processing. The plant must detect specific chemical markers in herbivore saliva, cross-reference them with patterns of tissue damage, and integrate that information to determine the identity of the threat. It's a multi-step inference process, turning fragments of evidence into actionable conclusions. And it happens entirely through biochemistry, through cascades of enzymes and receptors and regulatory proteins, without a hint of conscious thought. In laboratory settings, researchers have even managed to manipulate these systems, applying specific chemical cues to mimic herbivore attacks and observing how plants adjust their defenses accordingly. By varying the cues, they can trick plants into preparing for threats that aren't actually present, demonstrating that the defensive response isn't hardwired, but depends on interpretation of incoming signals. The plant is reading its environment, making inferences, and acting on them. This inferential capacity extends beyond defense. Plants also use environmental cues to make decisions about growth strategies. In crowded conditions, where competition for light is intense, many plants detect the light quality around them, particularly the ratio of red to far red wavelengths. When neighboring plants are close, they filter light in ways that shift this ratio. A plant detecting this shift interprets it as a signal of crowding and responds by allocating more resources to upward growth, stretching toward open sky. This shade avoidance response is a strategic choice. Grow tall quickly to outcompete neighbors, even at the cost of thicker stems or deeper roots. But if resources are limited, if the soil is poor or water scarce, the shade avoidance response may be muted. The plant weighs the benefit of rapid upward growth against the cost of depleting reserves, and in some cases chooses the more conservative strategy, remaining shorter but more robust. It's a cost-benefit analysis, a trade-off between competing priorities conducted without deliberation, but resulting in behavior that looks remarkably like decision-making. These strategic choices are visible across the plant kingdom, from tiny mosses to towering trees. Each species, each individual, faces a unique set of constraints and opportunities, and must navigate them without the luxury of movement or the guidance of a central nervous system. Yet they do navigate. They adapt, persist, and in many cases thrive, succeeding in environments so harsh or complex that it seems impossible they could do so without something resembling thought. Perhaps that's the deepest lesson plants offer us, that intelligence need not look like ours to be real. It need not be fast or centralized or conscious. It can be slow, distributed, chemical, and still be profoundly effective. It can emerge from networks rather than brains, from chemistry rather than electricity, from collective interaction rather than individual cognition. And in its own quiet way, it can be every bit as sophisticated as the intelligence we recognize more easily in ourselves and in the animals we know. Let these thoughts settle now like mist on morning leaves. There is no need to grasp or hold them tightly. Simply let them rest alongside you as you rest, as your breathing deepens and your body releases the day's tensions. The world of plants is patient, ancient, and endlessly intricate. More wonders remain, but they can wait. For now, drift in this green stillness, in the awareness that even in silence, even in rootedness, there is wisdom beyond words, perception beyond senses we recognize, memory woven into the living fabric of the world. We arrive now at the closing passages of our green journey, where thoughts grow softer and the boundary between waking and dreaming begins to blur. Let yourself release any effort, any need to follow closely. Simply float on these words as on a gentle current, drifting toward the quiet shore of sleep. We conclude our exploration of botanical intelligence, of the hidden awareness woven through root and leaf, and allow these final reflections to carry us toward rest. As we've traveled through this landscape of discovery, we've seen that plants possess capacities once thought exclusive to creatures with brains. They remember past experiences and adjust future behavior accordingly. They anticipate changes before those changes arrive. They communicate across distances, sharing warnings and resources. They make choices, weighing competing options and selecting strategies that balance risk and reward. They learn, forming associations between stimuli and outcomes, refining their responses through experience. All of this unfolds without a single neuron, without consciousness as we understand it, yet with a functional sophistication that challenges our very definitions of cognition. In recent years, these discoveries have begun influencing fields far beyond botany. Engineers and computer scientists have started looking to plants for inspiration, studying how distributed networks of simple components can produce complex, adaptive behavior. The way plants coordinate growth across thousands of cells, integrate multiple environmental signals simultaneously, and solve problems without centralized control offers potential blueprints for designing resilient systems, from swarm robotics to decentralized computing networks. Some researchers are exploring biomimetic sensors based on plant sensory systems, devices that could detect subtle changes in chemical composition, humidity, or light quality with the sensitivity plants achieve naturally. Others are studying how plants optimize resource allocation under uncertainty, hoping to apply similar principles to logistics, energy distribution, or traffic management. The idea is simple. If plants can solve complex optimization problems without brains, perhaps we can design human systems that operate on similar principles, distributing intelligence across networks rather than concentrating it in centralized processors. This shift in perspective represents more than technological innovation. It reflects a deeper recognition that intelligence is not a single phenomenon, but a spectrum, a collection of capacities that can be mixed and matched, distributed and specialized in countless ways. The intelligence of a forest is not the intelligence of a fox, and neither is the intelligence of a computer network. Each emerges from different substrates, operates on different timescales, solves different kinds of problems, yet all share the fundamental characteristic of transforming information into adaptive action. In the realm of artificial intelligence, this botanical perspective has encouraged researchers to move away from purely centralized, brain-like architectures toward more distributed, plant-like models. Instead of building systems with a single powerful processor making all decisions, some engineers now design networks where many simple agents interact, each responding to local conditions, together producing emergent behaviors that appear coordinated and purposeful. These systems can be remarkably robust. If one node fails, others compensate, much as a forest continues functioning even when individual trees fall. The parallels extend to learning algorithms as well. Machine learning systems increasingly rely on methods that don't require explicit programming of rules, instead allowing the system to adjust its behavior based on feedback, strengthening successful patterns and weakening unsuccessful ones. This is conceptually similar to how plants strengthen certain metabolic pathways after repeated stress, tuning their sensitivity to environmental cues through experience. The plant doesn't know it's learning, and neither does the algorithm. Yet both systems improve over time through the accumulation and application of information. These connections between botanical and artificial intelligence invite us to reconsider what it means to think, to know, to understand. If a plant can solve problems, make predictions, and adapt to changing circumstances without awareness, what does that tell us about the nature of cognition itself? Perhaps consciousness, that inner light of subjective experience, is not necessary for intelligence. Perhaps it's an added layer, valuable for certain kinds of organisms facing certain kinds of challenges, but not the foundation of intelligence itself. This possibility has profound implications. It suggests that intelligence might be far more common in the universe than we've assumed. If it can arise in plants, in fungal networks, in bacterial colonies, then perhaps it emerges wherever systems face complex, changing environments and possess mechanisms for sensing, storing, and acting on information. Intelligence might not require neurons or even cells in the forms we're familiar with. It might only require feedback, variation, and selection, processes that operate across many scales and substrates. Of course, recognizing intelligence in plants doesn't mean attributing to them the qualities we associate with consciousness. Plants almost certainly don't experience sensations, don't feel pain or pleasure in any way analogous to animals. They lack the centralized nervous systems that, in animals, give rise to unified subjective experience. But absence of consciousness doesn't mean absence of intelligence. And appreciating this distinction allows us to see the living world with fresh eyes. When we walk through a forest, we're moving through a network of communication, memory, and coordinated response. The trees around us are not passive scenery. They're participants in ecological conversations that have been unfolding for longer than our species has existed. The roots beneath our feet are woven together in partnerships that predate human civilization. The air carries chemical messages we cannot detect, warnings and invitations passing between organisms whose very existence challenges our assumptions about what life can be. This awareness doesn't require us to romanticize or anthropomorphize plants. We don't need to imagine them as conscious beings to appreciate the elegance of their solutions, the sophistication of their strategies, the quiet intelligence embedded in their form and function. They are what they are, living systems exquisitely tuned to their environments, shaped by unfathomable stretches of evolutionary time, capable of feats of coordination and adaptation that we're only beginning to understand. In this understanding lies a kind of humility. We are not the only intelligent beings on this planet. We're not even the only highly intelligent beings. We're simply one form intelligence has taken, one solution to the problem of surviving and reproducing in a complex, changing world. Other solutions exist all around us, in the slow growth of roots, in the seasonal timing of blooms, in the chemical conversations that link organisms across kingdoms and vast distances. This humility extends to how we might treat the plant world going forward. If plants can remember, learn, and coordinate in sophisticated ways, then our interactions with them take on new dimensions of meaning. Agriculture becomes not just the cultivation of passive resources, but engagement with responsive, adaptive organisms. Forest management becomes stewardship of living networks, whose complexity we're only beginning to map. Even gardening becomes a form of communication, a relationship where both parties adjust to one another over time. Some philosophers have begun exploring the ethical implications of plant intelligence, asking whether beings capable of memory and learning deserve moral consideration even in the absence of consciousness. These are not easy questions, and they don't have simple answers, but they're worth asking, worth sitting with in the quiet spaces between certainty and mystery. As you lie here now, breath slowing, thoughts beginning to dissolve into the softness of approaching sleep, consider the plants that share your world. The houseplant in the corner, silent witness to your days. The trees visible through your window, roots reaching deep into earth you'll never see. The grasses and flowers and crops that feed and shelter and surround us. They are not mere decorations or resources. They are living systems, intelligent in their own way, participants in the grand experiment of life on Earth. And perhaps most wonderfully, they remind us that intelligence need not be loud or fast or self-aware to be profound. It can be quiet, patient, distributed across time and space in ways that make it nearly invisible to creatures like us, always in motion, always seeking the next stimulus. Plant intelligence operates on scales we rarely observe, in chemical languages we cannot speak, through networks we cannot see. Yet it's there, constant and ancient, shaping ecosystems and atmospheres, turning sunlight into structure, connecting past to future through the simple, miraculous act of growth. In a universe that often seems cold and mechanical, plants offer a different vision. They show us that matter can be organized in ways that sense, respond, remember, and adapt. That complexity can arise without centralization. That coordination can emerge without command. That intelligence can exist without the bright flame of consciousness. They demonstrate that life is more inventive, more varied, more quietly astonishing than our theories often acknowledge. And in their silence, they teach us something we often forget in our noise-filled world, that wisdom doesn't always announce itself, that the deepest forms of knowing can unfold without words, that intelligence can be woven into the very fabric of existence, patient and enduring, asking nothing but offering everything. Let yourself rest now in this knowledge, in the awareness that you are surrounded by ancient intelligence, by systems that have been solving problems since long before language existed, long before thoughts took the form we recognize as thinking. You are part of a living planet, a world where awareness emerges in countless forms, where the boundary between living and knowing blurs into something rich and strange. The trees outside are processing light even as you close your eyes. Roots are navigating soil in slow, deliberate patterns. Leaves are adjusting to night, preparing for dawn. Chemical signals are moving through underground networks. Messages pass between organisms that will never meet face to face. The world is thinking in its own way, all around you and within you. For you too are part of this vast web of life, this ancient conversation between matter and meaning. There is nowhere you need to go, nothing you need to solve or understand. Simply allow yourself to drift, to dissolve into rest, carried on the same currents that move through sap and soil, through fungal threads and cellular walls, through all the quiet places where life transforms information into form, where intelligence blooms without announcement, where memory lives in molecules and wisdom grows in silence. The plants are dreaming, if dreaming is the word, in their slow green way. And you too can dream now, releasing the day, releasing thought itself, sinking into the deep rest that awaits beneath all our questions, all our seeking, all our wondering. Let the green world hold you. Let its patient rhythms slow your pulse. Let its ancient intelligence remind you that you need not strain or strive, that rest itself is wisdom, that in stillness there is knowing deeper than words. Good night, gentle traveler. May your sleep be as peaceful as a forest at dawn, as deep as roots in ancient soil, as renewing as the first green shoot pushing through spring earth toward light. The plants will keep their silent vigil while you rest, as they have for time beyond measure, as they will for time beyond imagining. And in the morning, they will still be there, growing, sensing, remembering, quietly intelligent, forever green, forever patient, forever home. Sleep now. Sleep deeply. The green world watches over you with a tenderness older than words, with an awareness that asks nothing, with an intelligence that simply is. And in that being, in that quiet existence, there is peace, there is rest, there is the softest welcome to the night. Good night.